Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. Today is another AMA episode. That is, Ask Me Anything. I love to answer your questions, and if you have a question you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'll answer it live on the air. Send your questions to victor@victorjm.com. That's victor@victorjm.com. Today's question comes from Steve, who asks, will multi-generational living and caring for aging parents reduce demand for housing by causing previously separate households to recombine? Well, Steve, this is a great question, and you are partly correct. Multi-generational living reduces the number of separate households formed today because several adults who might otherwise occupy separate units are sharing one dwelling. Economists call this the headship rate, the ratio of households or occupied units to the adult population. This is something that the Federal Reserve does monitor, and they note that when young adults stay with parents or older relatives during the pandemic, headship rates fell, and when they later moved out, the rebound became a meaningful contribution to housing demand, home prices, and rents. In the U.S., Pew Research found the share of people living in multi-generational households more than doubled from 7% in 1971 to 18% in 2021. While census counted about 6 million multi-generational households in 2020, up from 5.1 million in 2010. There are similar statistics in Canada, where multi-generational households in 2021 were home to about 2.4 million people, and that household type grew 21% from 2011 to 2021, faster than household growth overall. So what's driving it? There are three main drivers: affordability, caregiving, and culture. The research showed that financial issues were the top reason Americans lived in multi-generational households, but caregiving is also material. About 1/3 cite caregiving as a major reason. The National Association of Realtors also shows multi-generational home purchases are being driven by cost savings, that is, adult children moving back to care for aging parents. Canada shows the same pressure more acutely in expensive areas. The share of Canadians aged 25 to 39 living with parents doubled from 8.2% in 1991 to 16.3% in 2021, and among those aged 25 to 29, it rose from 15.7% to 31.1%. In Toronto, nearly half of the 25 to 29-year-olds live with parents. The trend suppresses measured demand for separate units in the near term. A 28-year-old living with parents is not showing up as a tenant or a buyer. That doesn't mean the demand has disappeared, it means it's delayed. They call this latent household formation. That matters for developers who look at demographics, because when affordability improves, when wages rise, or mortgage rates fall, or young adults marry and have children, some of that suppressed demand can reappear quickly. The Fed's analysis of the pandemic period is a good example. When headship rates recovered, household formation became a direct source of demand. But it also changes the product. Demand shifts towards larger homes, accessory dwelling units, basement suites, secondary suites, laneway homes, 3-bedroom rentals, built-to-rent townhouses, and flexible layouts that can accommodate adult children, grandparents, or caregivers. Many lenders and lending agencies have specifically pointed to secondary suites and laneway homes as one way seniors might unlock housing supply while remaining in place. So will this reduce demand for senior housing? Well, at the margin, yes, but structurally, no. You can delay demand for low acuity independent living in some submarkets, especially when the adult children live nearby, when homes can be adapted and cultural norms support aging with family. It can also push move-in ages later, meaning residents arrive with higher care needs. It is unlikely to reduce demand for assisted living, memory care, and long-term care and some of those higher acuity senior housing. The demographic wave is simply too big. Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies projects U.S. households aged 80 and older will rise nearly 60% from 2025 to 2035, adding about 6 million older adult households. The National Investment Center's senior housing analysts estimate a substantial inventory gap with hundreds of thousands of additional senior housing units being needed by 2030. That is, of course, under current penetration assumptions. Numbers in Canada point the same direction. Canada's Federal Seniors Housing Report notes that seniors are the fastest growing age group. Most live in private dwellings, but housing need increasingly includes affordability, accessibility, adaptability, care access, and safety. So the better answer is multi-generational housing will compete with senior housing at the lifestyle and early care end of the market, but it will not solve the need for care-based senior housing. So armed with this knowledge, what would you do differently from an underwriting perspective? Well, I would not haircut senior housing demand simply because multi-generational households are rising. That would be a very crude calculation. I would underwrite 3 separate demand pools. First, demand coming from young adults that might be suppressed, adult children living at home who may eventually become tenants or buyers later on. Second is the multi-generational product demand, larger rental units, townhouses, suites, accessory dwelling units, and homes with a flexible floor plan. And then third, needs-based senior housing, driven by the 80-plus population, need for memory care, those with mobility issues, and the availability of caregivers. From an investor standpoint, this is exactly why national averages are dangerous. So the practical conclusion is that multi-generational housing does reduce near-term household formation, but that's only by a couple of years. It means adult children are living at home a little bit longer, but when they do get married and start families, they generally do move out. And then at the senior end of the spectrum, it can be delayed, but it can only be delayed so much. Once physical care needs exceed a certain threshold, assisted living, memory care, or skilled nursing comes into play. I want to thank you, Steve, for an awesome question. And for the listeners at home, take a hyperlocal look at multi-generational housing demand in your area. And then, of course, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.